Hey readers, welcome back to Reads with Room B with me, Room B. As you know, we have finished, finally, with Alice and her adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass and what she found there. So today marks the start of our new read, J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan. There we go. To make you all aware, as we said in the Fast Facts video, all proceeds, if any, from all these videos will go directly to Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital. And if you, dear reader, would like to donate directly to them yourselves, here I will have a link for you in the description of this video and in the comments section. So, without further ado, here is the blurb for our read. One night, the mythical Peter Pan appears in the nursery of Wendy, John, and Michael Darling. An extraordinary adventure begins. With a sprinkle of Tinkerbell's fairy dust, Peter teaches 3 children to fly and whisks them away to Neverland. There they embark on daring escapades with mermaids, fairies, and lost boys, and the vengeful pirate Captain Hook. Since his creation, J.M. Barrie's Boy Who Couldn't Grow Up has become a cultural icon. This witty, imaginative story is full of mischief, magic, and bravery, and is one of the best-loved children's classics of all times. So now that you know a little bit about our story, let's begin. Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. Peter Breaks Through. Chapter 1. All children except one grow up. They soon know that they will grow up, and the way Wendy knew was this. One day, when she was 2 years old, she was playing in a garden, and she plucked another flower and ran with it to her mother. I suppose she must have thought it looked rather delightful. For Miss Darling put her hand on her heart and cried, "Oh, why can't you remain like this forever?" This was all that passed between them on the subject. But henceforth, Wendy knew she must grow up. You always know after you are 2. 2 is the beginning of the end. Of course, they lived at 14. And until Wendy came, her mother was the chief one. She was a lovely lady, with a romantic mind and such a sweet and mocking mouth. Her romantic mind was like tiny boxes within one another. That would come from the East puzzling. However, many of you discover that there is always one more, and that her sweet mocking mouth had one kiss on it that Wendy could never get, and though it was there, perfectly conspicuous in the right-hand corner. The way Mr. Darling had won her was this. Many gentlemen who had been boys when she was a girl discovered simultaneously that they all loved her. They all ran to her house to propose to her, except Mr. Darling, who took a cab and nipped in first, and so he got her. He got all of her, except that innermost box and the kiss. He never knew about the box, and in time he gave up trying for the kiss. Wendy thought Napoleon could have got it, but I can picture him trying and going off in a passion, slamming the door. Mr. Darling used to boast to Wendy that her mother was not only loved him, but respected him. He was one of those deep ones who knows about stocks and shares. Of course, no one really knows, but he quite seemed to know, and often said the stocks were up and the shares were down, and in a way that would have made any woman respect him. Miss Darling was married in white, and at first she kept the books perfectly, almost gleefully, as if it were a game. Not so much as a Brussels sprout was missing, but by and by whole cauliflowers dropped out, and instead of them there were pictures of babies without faces. She drew them when she should have been totting up. They were Miss Darling's guesses. Wendy came first, then John, then Michael. For a week or two after Wendy came, it was doubtful whether they would be able to keep her, as she was another mouth to feed. Mr. Darling was frightfully proud of her, but he was very honourable, and he sat on the edge of Miss Darling's bed, holding her hand and calculating expenses, while she looked at him imploringly. She wanted to risk it, come what might, but that was not his way. His way was with pencil and pieces of paper. And if she confused him with suggestions that he had to begin at the beginning again. And if she confused him with suggestions, he had to begin at the beginning again. I have £1.17 here, and 2 6 at the office. I can cut my coffee out the office. Say 10 shillings makes making 2 9 6. With your 18 and 3 makes 3 9 7. With 5 in my checkbook, making 8 9 7. Who is that moving? 8 9 7 on dot and carry the 7. Don't speak, my own. The ponulant, the man who came to the door. Quiet, child. Dot, carry the child. There, you've done it. Did I say 997? Yes, I said 997. The question is, can we try for a year on 997? Of course we can, George, she cried. But she was prejudiced in Wendy's favour, and he really was the gander character of the two. Remember Mumps, he warned her, almost threateningly, and went off again. Mumps, £1. That is what I have put down, but I dare say it will be more like 30 shillings. Don't speak. Measles 1 5. German measles half a guinea makes 2 15 6. Don't waggle your finger. Whooping cough say 15 shillings. And so it went on, and it added up differently each time. But at last, Wendy just got through, with mumps reduced to 12 and 6, and the 2 kinds of measles treated as one. There was the same excitement over John, and Michael had an even narrower squeak, but both were kept, and soon you might have seen the 3 of them going in a row to Miss Folsom's kindergarten school, accompanied by their nurse. Miss Darling loved to have everything just so, and Mr. Darling had a passion for being exactly like his neighbours, so of course they had a nurse. As poor as they were, owing to the amount of milk the children drank, this nurse was a prim Newfoundland dog called Nana, who had belonged to no one in particular until the Darlings engaged her. She had always thought children important, however, and the Darlings had become acquainted with her in Kensington Gardens, where she spent most of her spare time peeping into perambulators. That's baby carriages. And this was much hated by careless nursemaids, whom she followed to their homes and complained of to their mistresses. She proved to be quite a treasure of a nurse. How thorough she was at bath time, and up at any moment of the night if one of her charges made the slightest cry. Of course, her kennel was in the nursery. She had a genius for knowing when a cough is a thing to have no patience with, and when it needs stalking around her throat. She believed to her last day in old-fashioned remedies like rhubarb leaf, and made sounds of contempt over this newfangled talk about germs and so on. It was a lesson in propriety to see her escorting the children to school, walking sedately by their side when they were well behaved, and butting them back into line if they strayed. On John's bitter days, she never once forgot his sweater, and she usually carried an umbrella in her mouth in case of rain. There was room in the basement of Miss Folsom's school where the nurses waited. They sat on forms while Nana lay on the floor, but that was the only difference. They affected to ignore her as of an inferior social status to themselves, and she despised their light talk. She resented the visits to the nursery from Mrs. Darling's friends, but if they did come, she whipped off Michael's pinafore and put him in the one with blue braiding, and smoothed out Wendy and made a dash at John's hair. No nursery could possibly have been conducted more correctly, and Mr. Darling knew it. And yet sometimes he wondered uneasily whether the neighbors talked. He had his position to consider. Nana also troubled him in another way. He sometimes had a feeling she did not admire him. "I know she admires you tremendously, George," Miss Darling would assure him, and then she would sign to the children to be especially nice to father. Lovely dances followed, in which their only other servant, Liza, would sometimes be allowed to join. Such a midget she looked in her long skirt and maid's cap, though she had sworn when engaged she would never see 10 again. The gaiety of the romps, the gayest of all, was Mrs. Darling, who pirouetted so wildly that all you could see of her was the kiss. And then if you had dashed at her, you might have got it. There was never a simpler, happier family until the coming of Peter Pan. Miss Darling first heard of Peter when she was tidying up her children's minds. It was the nightly custom of every good mother, after her children were asleep, to rummage in their minds and put things straight for the next morning, repacking into their proper places the many articles that may have wandered in during the day. If you could keep awake, but of course you can't, you would see your own mother doing this, and you would find it very interesting to watch her. It's quite like tidying up the drawers. You would see her on her knees, I expect, lingering humorously over some of your contents, wondering what on earth where you had picked this up, making discoveries sweet and not so sweet, pressing this to her cheek as if it were nice as a kitten, hurriedly stirring that out of sight. And when you wake in the morning, the naughtiness and evil passions which you went to bed with would have been folded up small and placed at the bottom of your mind, and on top, beautifully aired and spread out, your prettier thoughts, ready for you to put on. I don't know if you have ever seen a map of a person's mind. Doctors sometimes draw maps of other parts of you, and your own map can become intensely interesting, but trying to catch them drawing a map of a child's mind, which is not only confusing, but keeps going around all the time. There are zigzag lines in it, like your temperature on a card, and there are all these roads, and there are all these probably roads in the island. For the Neverland is always more or less an island, with an astonishing splashes of colour here and there, and coral reefs and rakish-looking craft in the offing, and savage and lonely layers, and gnomes who are mostly tailors, and caves through which rivers run, and princes with 6 elder brothers, the hut fast going to decay, and one very small old lady with a hooked nose. It would be an easy map if there were all that, but there is also the first day at school, religion, fathers, round the pond, needlework, murders, hangings, verbs that take the dative, chocolate pudding day, getting into braces, say 99 3 pence, 99 3 pence for pulling out your tooth yourself, and so on. And either of these are part of the island, or they are another map showing through. So it's all but rather confusing, especially as nothing will stand still. Of course, the Neverlands vary a good deal. John's, for instance, had a lagoon with flamingos flying over it, at which John was shooting, while Michael, who was very small, had a flamingo with lagoons flying over it. John, who lived in a boat turned upside down on the sands. Michael lived in a wigwam. Wendy had a house of leaves, deftly sewn together. John had no friends. Michael had friends at night. Wendy had a pet wolf, forsaken by its parents. But on the whole, the Neverlands have a family resemblance. If they stood still in a row, you could say of them that they each have each other's nose, and so forth. On these magic shores, children at play are forever breaching the coracles. On these magic shores, children at play are forever beaching their coracles. We have been there too. We can still hear the sound of the surf, though we shall land no more. Of all the delectable islands in the Neverland is the snuggest and most compact, not large and sprawly, with tedious distance between one adventure and the next, but nicely crammed. When you play at it by day with the chairs and tablecloth, it is not in the least alarming, but in the 2 minutes before you go to sleep, it becomes very real, and that is why there are night lights. Occasionally in her travels through her children's mind, Miss Darling found that there were things she could not understand, and of these quite most perplexing was the word Peter. She knew of no Peter, and yet here he was, and yet he was here and there in John and Michael's mind, while Wendy's began to be scrawled all over with him. The name stood out in bolder letters than any of the other words, and as Miss Darling gazed, she felt that it had an oddly cocky appearance. Yes, he is rather cocky, Wendy admitted with regret, and her mother had begun questioning her. But who is he, my pet? He is Peter Pan, Mother. At first, Miss Darling did not know, but after thinking back to her childhood, she remembered a Peter Pan who was said to live with the fairies. There were odd stories about him, as that when children died, he went part of the way with them, so that they should not be frightened. She believed in him at the time, but now she was married and full of sense, she quite doubted there was such a person. Besides, she said to Wendy, he would have been grown up by this time. Oh no, he isn't grown up, Wendy assured her confidently. And he is just my size. She meant that he was her size in both mind and body. She didn't know how she knew, she just knew it. Mrs. Darling consulted Mr. Darling, but he smiled pooh-pooh. Mark my words, he said, this is some nonsense Nana has been putting into their heads. Just the sort of idea a dog would have. Leave it alone and it will blow over. But it would not blow over, and soon the troublesome boy gave Miss Darling quite a shock. The children, having had the strangest adventures without being troubled by them. For instance, they may remember to mention, a week after the event happened, that they were in the wood and they had met their dead father and had a game with him. It was in a casual way. that Wendy one morning made a disquieting revelation. Some of the leaves of a tree had been found on her nursery floor, which certainly were not there when the children went to bed, and Miss Darling puzzled over them. When Wendy said, with a tolerant smile, I do believe that is Peter again. Whatever do you mean, Wendy? It is so naughty of him not to wipe his feet, said Wendy, sighing. She was a tidy child. She explained in quite a matter-of-fact manner that she thought Peter sometimes came into the nursery at night and sat at the foot of her bed and played his pipes to her. Unfortunately, she never woke up, so she didn't know how she knew. What nonsense you talk, Precious. No one can get into the house without knocking. I think he comes in by the window, she said. My love, it's 3 floors up. Were there not leaves at the foot of the window, Mother? It was quite true. The leaves had been found near the window. Miss Darling did not know what to think. For all it seemed so natural to Wendy that she could not dismiss it by saying she had been dreaming. My child, the mother cried, why did you not tell me of this before? I forgot, said Wendy lightly, as she was hurrying to get her breakfast in. Oh, surely she must have been dreaming, but on the other hand there were leaves. Miss Darling examined them very carefully. They were skeleton leaves, but she was sure they did not come from any tree that grew in England. She crawled about on the floor, peering at it with candle for marks of strange foot. She rattled the poker in the chimney and tapped the walls. She let down a tape from window to the pavement. It was a sheer drop of 30 feet without so much as a spout to climb up by. Certainly Wendy had been dreaming. But Wendy had not been dreaming. And the very next night, a night on which extraordinary adventures of these children may have said to have begun, on the night we speak of, all children were once more in bed. It happened to be Nana's evening off. Miss Darling had bathed them and sung to them, till one by one they had let go of her hand and slipped into the land of sleep. All were looking safe and cozy. She smiled at her fears now and sat down tranquilly by the fire to sew. It was something for Michael, who was on his birthday was getting into shirts. The fire was warm, however, the nursery dimly lit by 3 night lights, and presently the sewing lay on Miss Darling's lap, and then her head nodded, oh so gracefully. She was asleep. Look at the 4 of them. Wendy and Michael over there, John over there, Miss Darling by the fire. There should have been a 4th nightlight. While she slept, she had a dream. She dreamt that she had gone to Neverland and had come too near, and that strange boy had broken through from it. He did not alarm her, for though she had seen him before in the faces of many women who had no children, perhaps he is to be found in the faces of some mothers also. But in her dream, he had read the film that obscures Neverland, and she saw Wendy, John, and Michael peeping through the gap. The dream itself would have been a trifle, but while she was dreaming, the window of the nursery blew open, and a boy did drop on the floor. He was accompanied by a strange light, no bigger than your fist, which darted about the room like a living thing. I think it must have been that light that waked Miss Darling. She startled up with a cry and saw the boy, and somehow she knew at once he was Peter Pan. If you or I or Wendy had been there, we would have seen that he was very like Miss Darling's kiss. He was a lovely boy, clad in skeleton leaves and the juices that ooze out of trees. But the most intrinsic thing about him was that he had all his teeth. And when he saw she was a grown-up, he gnashed the little pearls at her. And that is our first chapter of Peter Pan. Like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time, readers. Keep reading. Bye.